cumplió año ayer, así que felicidades. Gracias.
Bien, podemos tomar asiento para continuar con esta programación de apertura. Señoras y señores, hemos llegado al momento de la presentación artística de este acto de apertura de la Semana del Clima para América Latina y el Caribe. En República Dominicana utilizamos la danza, la música, para expresar los valores, las costumbres y las tradiciones de la vida cultural nacional. Y esto lo vamos a evidenciar a través de la siguiente puesta en escena que pone en alto la dominicanidad. Nos llena de mucho orgullo presentarles al ballet folclórico Escuela Libre Carril de Jaina. Con ustedes.
Y los hombres van llorando, y los hombres van gozando. Para el centenario me tuve a morir, para el centenario me tuve a morir, porque no viniste a saber de mí, porque no viniste a saber de mí. Las mujeres van gozando, las mujeres van gozando, y los hombres, y los hombres. nochecito durando para llegar. Por allá voy a canal, por allá voy a canal, por allá voy a canal, por allá voy a canal. Yo no puedo vivir sin tu amor, porque muero, porque muero, porque muero de pena y dolor. Yo no puedo, yo no puedo, yo no puedo vivir sin tu amor, porque muero, porque muero, porque muero de pena y dolor. Ay, tío, ando buscando y no te encontré. Anduve buscando y no te encontré. Montamos en la mula y yo no nos pie. Montamos en la mula y yo no nos pie. Ay, caramba, y yo no nos pie. Ay, tío, una mula.
Bien, agradecemos esta expresión cultural de un merecido aplauso. Y así despedimos esta participación cultural de la Escuela Artística de Ballet Folclórico, Escuela Libre Carril de Jaina, una representación de esta cultura que nos ocupa a nosotros aquí en República Dominicana. Y vamos a dar continuidad al desarrollo de este programa, y en ese orden nos complace recibir el mensaje del distinguido señor Ibrahim Etió, secretario ejecutivo de la Convención de las Naciones Unidas de Lucha contra la Desertificación, quien en esta ocasión nos acompaña de manera remota y se dirige a todos nosotros a través del siguiente audiovisual. Bueno, el mensaje está orientado en ese mismo orden de la necesidad, de la urgencia que tiene el planeta, que tienen los gobiernos, que tienen los países de actuar ya, hacerlo de manera urgente. Pero vamos a continuar también con esta programación y invitamos a hacer el uso de la palabra al distinguido señor embajador regional de la COP26 del Gobierno del Reino Unido para Asia y el Pacífico, Ken O'Flaherty.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to start by thanking our Dominican Republic hosts and the UNFCCC for allowing me to speak at this event. It's wonderful that we are able to gather together to talk about how to tackle the greatest threat facing humanity, which remains climate change, and to do so in such a wonderful country. You have heard my country, the United Kingdom, today is suffering the highest temperatures in our history, and we are seeing climate impacts across the world which are devastating economies, societies, and communities. For that reason, climate change has for many years been a top priority for the UK government, notably, but not only, ahead of our presidency of COP26 and the Leaders' Summit in Glasgow last year. And I can say today that it will remain a priority long after our COP26 presidency, when we pass the mantle to our Egyptian colleagues in November this year. It is now 8 months since Glasgow and COP26 were under the rulebook, something which had been unachievable in the previous 6 years. Based on those commitments and the commitments made outside the the negotiating rooms in Glasgow, we can't say that we have kept alive the 1.5 degrees Celsius target. But that prospect of keeping 1.5 degrees Celsius alive is only achievable through immediate and global action. As we have heard, the IPCC's recent report set a very stark warning about the impacts that the world will face if we don't act decisively this decade to reduce our emissions worldwide. Since COP26, 12 countries have submitted revised NDCs, and we hope to see many more updates ahead of this September's deadline. And in the UK, we are seeking to lead by example. Between 1990 and 2019, we grew our economy by 78%, but we also cut our emissions by 44%, decarbonising faster than any other G7 country. And we're building on the plan set out in the Net Zero strategy, showing how we will deliver our 2030 target while accounting for the progress made. And we're determined to use our remaining time as COP26 presidency to press for faster and further reductions to global emissions. But we know that even by achieving emissions reductions, we will need to adapt to climate change. Climate impacts are happening around the world today. Across Latin America and the Caribbean, we are already seeing increasing levels of extreme weather events, biodiversity loss, droughts, forest fires, and rising sea levels, just to name a few of the challenges. So we must do more to support adaptation. I'm pleased to say that under the UK presidency, there was major progress made on adaptation finance. At Glasgow, countries agreed to double climate finance for adaptation to support the most vulnerable countries worldwide by 2025. Over $450 million was mobilised for initiatives and programmes enhancing locally led adaptation processes. The UK has doubled its own international climate finance to £11.6 billion over 5 years, and we have sought to achieve a balance between work on mitigation, cutting emissions, and work on adaptation and dealing with those impacts of climate change. On finance more generally, under our presidency, 95% of the largest developed country climate finance providers made new commitments. It now looks likely that $500 billion will be mobilised over the period 2021 to 2025. And over 450 private financial institutions responsible for over $130 trillion of assets have committed to net zero by 2050 through the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero within the UN's broader Race to Zero programme. But we know that finance on its own is not enough. We must boost access to that finance. Under the UK presidency, we launched the Task Force on Access to Climate Finance in Glasgow in partnership with Fiji as co-chair and the Task Force Steering Committee. And we are committed to working with small island developing states to find tangible solutions to the unique challenges which they face on accessing high-quality climate finance. But to quote our COP president, Alok Sharma, these agreements and commitments are for now just words on paper. So we have to focus on delivery. We have to make sure that 2022 is the year of implementation, as we have already heard. We have to turn those targets into policies and into plans. We have to take forward work on adaptation, on loss and damage, and crucially for this region, we must ensure that finance flows faster and that it is easier to access for those most vulnerable. And we have to push for further action across crucial sectors such as coal, cars, and ending deforestation. So I'm delighted to be taking part in this Climate Week. I hope to meet as many of you as possible in the margins and at the multiple fascinating events which are being organised by our hosts, and to ensure that together we can deliver, and together we can keep 1.5 degrees Celsius alive. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, señor embajador. Vale destacar que esta Semana del Clima para América Latina y el Caribe es un espacio de discusión regional que dará lugar a las negociaciones, también a los preparativos de la Cumbre del Clima, la COP27, que se desarrollará en Egipto el próximo mes de noviembre. Y en este contexto habla para todos nosotros el distinguido representante de alto nivel de la COP27, el señor Mahmoud Mohieldin.
Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, it's a great pleasure for me to be here. Just arriving from a mission on the other side of the world, in the Eastern Hemisphere, in Australia and Singapore, trying to manage the jet lag and beyond. I'm very personally pleased to be here in this lovely country. This is one of the very few countries that have been beaten in visits by my wife and daughter. They have been here 4 times. I only managed to come only once this time. So this is hopefully will get me improving in the future and send pictures. I'm not quite sure that I'll be sending the same pictures of the lovely beaches and the great culture, heritage, and the museums and all, because it seems with the busy schedule that will be in these rooms, but definitely it's a good opportunity to be here. Very impressed as well with the previous speakers' commitments and lines of emphasis, building, as was said, on the achievements in Glasgow. And I like to congratulate in particular our young activist, Francisco Javier Veras, for his enthusiastic and passionate words. And on behalf of the champion team, the champions represented here by my good colleagues Arama and Maria Alejandra, I'd like to invite him to be a guest of honor for by the champions to come to Egypt and Sharm el-Sheikh. I hope that you'll be allowed to do that, or the translation will be coming to you, that you'll be invited to Sharm el-Sheikh to represent your country, Colombia, in the visit to Sharm el-Sheikh in November. Fully paid, I hope. That will not cost your pocket money for the school more than what you like to allocate. But being gender balanced as well, in addition to having this young representative of Latin America and the Caribbean with us, we need to have some sort of gender balance, which was missed in this panel. But perhaps it could be considered with the blessings of His Excellency, the Minister and the organizers here, that the champions will be more than pleased to invite as well a young lady, activist, same age, from the Dominican Republic, to come as well to Egypt and Sharm el-Sheikh. Well, I have to disclose that I am a father to one daughter, so it will be really a relief for me to fix that. Otherwise, she will be known that I invited a young activist, and I didn't invite a young lady activist as well. So let me just share with you, building on what His Excellency, the ambassador from the UK, Ambassador Flaherty just mentioned about the achievements. I think there is a great deal of bread and butter, a great deal of continuity from Paris to Glasgow and what happened in between. So the issue here, as you'll be seeing in the portal of the Egyptian presidency, it's implement, implement, implement. I think we have enough documents, enough reports to fill this room, without exaggeration, of assessments of how the crisis is affecting us. It is not about the end of the century. It's about the end of our existence if we're not acting fast and now. So it's basically about the implementation, and implementation requires three things: good data, adequate finance, and qualified teams and institutions and policies for implementation. And I like the points of emphasis here on the collaboration, because finance alone will not do it. Data alone will not. Governments and indeed the non-state actors cannot be overemphasized. I like, in particular, in my presence here during this week, to have more engagements with local communities, with business leaders, with investors, and with the leaders of the different regional platforms. Happy as well to say that in addition to the Climate Week, for the first time ever in the history of hosting the COPs, we are doing 5 regional roundtables with the hope of alignment between the finance and the financial institutions, especially building in the momentum that was created in Glasgow by having the GFANZ, the Glasgow Finance Alliance, that has more than $130 trillion of assets committed. So our basic idea is we have 5 regional economic commissions of the United Nations. So in addition to the Climate Week that had their own objectives and functions under the auspices of the UNFCCC, at the same time with the regional economic commissions and in coordination with the rest of the UN system, we are doing this kind of matchmaking, bringing the finance where the promise of the projects are. Because each time you go to talk to the financial institutions, say, well, we have the money, but we don't have the projects. You go to the line ministers from different countries, including from our host country and the rest of the membership of ICLAC or the Latin American and the Caribbean teams, they would say, well, we have the projects, but we don't have the money. Common sense, get the demand to be closer to the supply, and this way we're going to be doing 5 of them, and we're doing that in the months of August and September, and the outcomes of these 5 regional roundtables of the projects with promise to be funded by the GFANZ and beyond are going to be announced in Sharm el-Sheikh. Very quickly, mindful of your time, I mentioned collaboration as essential. There is something else that is of great relevance to this region, and it would be, I hope it would be fixed in Sharm el-Sheikh as much as we can. This issue of equity between mitigation and adaptation. Glasgow did a great deal of work in reviving the adaptation file and bringing it again to the attention of the participants. But there is a bias against adaptation, and that bias has many reasons. And that bias is even reflected in the finance. In a typical country and in a typical financial institutions of the development finance institutions, including the Inter-American Development Bank or the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank, we'll be seeing the finance going to climate action, 80% on mitigation or 75% on mitigation in best case scenario, and less than 25% on adaptation. This needs to be fixed. This needs to be fixed. The resilience of our infrastructure needs to be protected. The agricultural system needs to be protected. Everybody today is suffering from increases in food, and we need to enhance food security. This needs to be with adequate investment. Our shores, our beaches, and the rest of the ecosystem affected by lack of attention to adaptation, that needs that kind of support, and that should really be fixed by the right technology, the right support, and the right finance. Unfortunately, so far, the adaptation sector didn't find the business case for the private sector to be as enthusiastic in getting itself into, unlike what we see now in the great solutions led by the private sector today in renewable energy. When you see solar projects around the world with their larger or bigger scales, wind farms, and many of other solutions, green hydrogen. In these cases, public-private partnership and leadership of the private sector, you will always find the solutions. But adaptation requires more public finance. This means more money coming from governments, but more money could be required further from the development finance institution. And you will be getting a lot of ideas and solutions on the adaptation front, but in a more holistic approach. We are not going to be playing that kind of confusing game. Is it mitigation more or adaptation more? It's a holistic approach relevant to the countries in questions, and here you can really see the right balance, but that right balance needs really to be adequately funded. And we need really to realize the potential of the nexus between the energy side, the food system, and water. And here, we will bring in the climate issues to the attention of the ordinary public, those who are concerned about the day-to-day kind of constraints facing them every day. They are suffering today from increasing energy prices. So the climate action could be part of the solution. They are suffering from increases of food prices and food insecurity. Climate action could be part of the solution. They are suffering from shortage of water. So again, climate action would be part of the solution, not isolated from what it should be the case. And finally, I spoke a lot about finance, and this is the main point that you'll be expecting more from the summit and the conference in Sharm el-Sheikh in November. It's not adequate just to talk about finance, because if finance comes only in the form of debt, developing economies and emerging markets are over-indebted. So we need really to have more funding in terms of investments, more equity participation, not just debt. This is one. Second, I'm working with colleagues, including from the UN system, from the Regional Economic Commission of Africa, for almost 18 months now, on innovative solutions based on debt reduction mechanism, debt swaps. And this region, you call it ECLAC, you call it LAC, based on the acronyms, but here, the Latin American and the Caribbean region have been pioneers in areas related to swaps, from the solution that came as far back as in 1970s and 80s in Costa Rica, and we had these kind of solutions. Now we are doing debt reduction mechanisms and linking them to investment in climate and biodiversity in addition to nature. And the solutions are there, and we have some good examples that we are going to be building on. We need to build adequate carbon markets, and there are many solutions that are going to be presented, and I'll be eager to listen for advice from this gathering. There has been a great deal of confusion about what we mean when it comes to green finance and ESG, compliance with rules, and we look forward to the committee led by Minister McKenna, the former Minister of Environment and Climate of Canada, and this is going, hopefully, some of the early results without committing her and her team, but we hope that the report coming from her, the early findings will be shared in November. And finally, all of our efforts will not really be realizing the potential unless the budget of the state is fully aligned with what we're talking about. And here we need the budget of the state. It's not just about the words. As being said, you need me to know your priorities, show me your budget. This goes to the household, to the corporate sector, and to the state as well. So we need the budgets of the state to be fully aligned with what we're talking about, not to send the wrong signals or to crowd out the business sector. And this is going to be further discussed in Sharm el-Sheikh. As you can see, there's going to be a very big agenda ahead of us in all areas of collaboration, in building on the promise of Paris Agreement and Glasgow. But again, the emphasis is going to be implement and implement and implement. And actually, the younger generations are expecting a lot from us, and they are not going to be leaving us without really good reminder of what we should really be doing better for their sake and actually for the people and the planet at large. Thank you so much.
Bien, hemos escuchado las palabras del distinguido representante de alto nivel de la COP27. Y desde el Ministerio de Medio Ambiente de República Dominicana se ha establecido una línea de acción asumida en las últimas reuniones de alto nivel sobre cambio climático. Invitamos a este escenario a la distinguida viceministra del Ministerio de Medio Ambiente de República Dominicana, Milagros de Camps.
Muy buenas tardes, un saludo, reitero los saludos que ya sé en los que me antecedieron, pero quería hacer un saludo muy especial a mi amigo Francisco, que estuvo de cumpleaños el día de ayer y que nos honra con su presencia aquí en República Dominicana. Y quería iniciar hablando sobre precisamente la sostenibilidad que se hace, que se desarrolla, que se define en función de la juventud. Porque se definió en el 1987 en el reporte Brundtland como la forma de satisfacer nuestras necesidades sin comprometer las necesidades del futuro. Y precisamente tenemos un representante del que estamos muy orgullosos en toda Latinoamérica el día de hoy. Ya se habló de acción climática, se habló de financiamiento, se habló de ambición, y yo quiero hablar un poquito sobre el sector privado como actor principal. Hace más de 200 años, las naciones de nuestra región iniciaron a concebirse como repúblicas democráticas, fundamentadas en la dignidad humana, la libertad y el equilibrio ecológico. Y por 2 siglos, Latinoamérica y el Caribe ha luchado de forma constante por el progreso económico, la estabilidad social y una convivencia armónica con el medio ambiente. Hoy en día estamos en medio de 3 crisis globales, y cualquiera de ellas es suficiente para derribarnos. La crisis climática, superando una pandemia con grandes impactos en la salud pública y la economía global, y la crisis de la inflación, producida por una guerra que amenaza los fundamentos de la democracia, en el mismo continente que vio nacer este imperfecto pero constructivo modelo de gobierno. Estas situaciones han provocado incrementos en los precios de la energía, que a su vez aumentaron el costo de vida a nivel global. Y como si fuera poco, la crisis climática se continúa exacerbando y estamos en camino a un aumento superior de los 2 grados centígrados, un calentamiento que atenta contra la estabilidad social, el progreso económico y la misma supervivencia nuestra sobre la Tierra. A pesar de las agravadas crisis que nos azotan y aquellos que continúan surgiendo a través de los años, no nos podemos desenfocar. Es nuestra obligación moral y misión de vida asegurar que nuestra región progresará en el tiempo, a pesar de los impactos de esta crisis climática. Pero para lograrlo, necesitamos que todos contribuyamos, y el Acuerdo de París nos brinda la hoja de ruta para lograrlo. En el 2015, en París, acordamos 3 grandes objetivos: limitar la temperatura global en 1.5 grados Celsius, construir resiliencia y transformar el sistema financiero global. El tercer objetivo es primordial porque es catalizador para lograr los 2 primeros. He aquí la importancia del sector empresarial y en especial del sector financiero en esta lucha. Señoras y señores empresarios, ustedes tienen en sus manos gran parte de la solución a esta crisis y deben actuar ya. El financiamiento de proyectos de industrias contaminantes es el pasado. Las inversiones en energías renovables es el futuro. La generación de ganancias corporativas, sin importar el impacto ambiental, es el pasado. Y la descarbonización empresarial es el futuro. No miremos hacia atrás, miremos hacia adelante. No podemos continuar incentivando y prestando dinero barato a industrias contaminantes. Si logramos que el sector financiero redireccione sus inversiones hacia la sostenibilidad, tendremos más éxitos del que hoy podemos imaginar. Tenemos grandes oportunidades para dinamizar una revolución económica sin precedentes y generar millones de empleos dignos que mejoren la calidad de vida de nuestra gente. No podemos perder esta oportunidad. Si nosotros logramos superar la crisis climática, será porque la empresa privada así se lo propone. Si fracasamos, será en gran parte porque no fuimos capaces de dimensionar los infinitos beneficios de un futuro verde. La innovación es la ruta más eficiente para salir de este laberinto, pero aún hace falta muchísima voluntad. Por eso me llena de optimismo ver la representación de aliados del sector privado, la sociedad civil y las juventudes de la región y la República Dominicana. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos. Necesitamos a más de ustedes en esta gran coalición para descarbonizar nuestras economías y mejorar la calidad de vida de nuestra gente. En el gobierno del presidente Luis Abinader hemos encontrado a un aliado, a muchos aliados, para fortalecer la coalición que tenemos que seguir expandiendo para lograr nuestra misión. Es nuestro deber finalizar la obra que nuestros libertadores concibieron hace más de 200 años. Latinoamérica y el Caribe ha superado periodos oscuros de la historia con orgullo y valentía, y la nobleza, la resiliencia y el ímpetu de nuestra gente son nuestras mayores fortalezas para poner en marcha la más importante transformación económica y social de nuestra historia. Invito a los jóvenes y a los líderes civiles, a las mujeres, a que lleven las convicciones a las calles de las salas de junta y los puestos de toma de decisión en los gobiernos, de la empresa privada, de instituciones financieras y de organizaciones internacionales para transformarlas y hacer que trabajen hacia el objetivo de 1.5 grados Celsius y el progreso colectivo. Estamos firmemente convencidos de que vamos a superar esta crisis climática, y si lo logramos, las futuras generaciones nos recordarán por mucho tiempo. Si fracasamos, los hijos, hijas, nietos y nietas nunca nos lo perdonarán. Limitar el aumento de la temperatura global en 1.5 grados Celsius es una obligación, es una responsabilidad moral. Somos la última generación de líderes con la oportunidad de resolver esta crisis y de prevenir sus impactos más catastróficos, así que manos a la obra. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Milagro, por estas palabras. Y ya lo dijo en los medios de comunicación, Santo Domingo se ha convertido esta semana en la capital climática de América Latina y el Caribe. Llega el momento de escuchar el mensaje del honorable vicepresidente ejecutivo del Consejo Nacional para el Cambio Climático y Mecanismo de Desarrollo Limpio, el doctor Max Wick, quien, dicho sea de paso, hoy está de cumpleaños. Un aplauso para él.
Bueno, sí, yo estoy de cumpleaños, pero es un placer pasarme el día con todos ustedes, ¿verdad? En el día de hoy. Y justamente, bueno, nos hemos saludado, bienvenidos a todos los visitantes internacionales que están acá, pero yo quería destacar el carácter particular del día de hoy, porque es que en el día de hoy hemos estado, hace un momento hemos cerrado la cumbre de ministras y ministros de medio ambiente iberoamericana, y eso ha hecho que distinguidos participantes, ministros, funcionarios de los diferentes países y de la Secretaría General Iberoamericana estén con nosotros. Y justamente cerrando aquella actividad estamos abriendo esta otra. Y eso hace que justamente República Dominicana, en este caso la ciudad de Santo Domingo, se coloque en el mapa de interés con relación a los temas ambientales y climáticos. Estoy cerrando y lo que quisiera es hacer unas reflexiones muy breves. Y quisiera, en primer lugar, destacar el entusiasmo que ha reinado entre nosotros desde ayer, que está reinando y que estoy seguro se va a manifestar hasta el cierre de esta semana regional de Latinoamérica y el Caribe. En segundo lugar, el nivel de los debates a los que yo he podido asistir, el debate de los ministros ha sido sumamente interesante, y también las discusiones técnicas también yo estoy seguro que nos van a aportar mucho acerca de las implicaciones que tiene toda esta crisis climática, no solamente en el corto plazo, sino en el mediano y en el largo plazo. Ahora, yo quisiera resaltar lo siguiente. Muy a menudo se dice, se afirma, y yo creo que con razón, es que en la lucha contra el cambio climático son los gobiernos los llamados a conducirla. Pero los gobiernos también están regidos por tiempos políticos limitados. Los gobiernos son elegidos por plazos, yo diría, breves, como debe ser. Pero el problema, y ese es el plazo que fijan los tiempos electorales de cada país. Sin embargo, estos tiempos políticos electorales no son suficientes para enfrentar problemas del aliento que tienen la crisis climática. Ahora, estamos obligados, aunque los gobiernos sean, por decirlo de alguna manera, de corto plazo, los gobiernos y las sociedades tienen que ver las cosas a mediano y largo plazo. Un país, en ese sentido, un país como el nuestro, como la República Dominicana, que ha manifestado mucho dinamismo en el crecimiento económico en las últimas décadas, que se ha producido un crecimiento económico indiscutible, aunque con altos niveles de desigualdad y con mucha afectación del medio ambiente, se encuentra hoy frente a lo que pudiéramos considerar una paradoja. Estamos obligados a desarrollar una acción climática ahora, dentro de una situación en que hay un escenario global sumamente competitivo. Hay que invertir hoy en la acción climática y eso cuesta. Al mismo tiempo que hay que invertir hoy en la acción climática, y que eso es costoso, es decir, al mismo tiempo esa acción climática, esa inversión, se presenta también como una oportunidad. Y no solamente como una oportunidad, sino también como una necesidad. Dicho sea de otra manera, tenemos que invertir en la acción climática, esto cuesta, los recursos son limitados, pero también eso nos da oportunidades, pero si no lo hacemos, también vamos a tener serias limitaciones. Entonces, ahí viene la gran pregunta que se pueden hacer muchas personas en nuestra sociedad y en muchas sociedades. ¿Por qué invertir en la mitigación y en la adaptación cuando todavía tenemos muchas necesidades sociales por satisfacer? Es decir, ¿cuál es la justificación de que teniendo tantas necesidades en salud, en educación, en mejorar las formas productivas, en la agricultura, ¿por qué entonces invertir en el cambio climático? Y la respuesta se encuentra en que si no producimos esas inversiones necesarias en el cambio climático hoy, después vamos a tener que invertir muchísimo más. El costo va a ser muchísimo más alto. Y además, el otro aspecto es que estamos en ese sentido, como los recursos son limitados, no vamos a poder invertir, no vamos a disponer de todos los recursos que necesitamos para invertir, y por consiguiente estamos obligados a invertir al mismo tiempo en las necesidades sociales, al mismo tiempo que abordamos las reformas de la economía para hacerle frente al cambio climático. Es en este sentido que se pronunciaba el ministro de Economía, el amigo Miguel Seara, ayer cuando inauguraba la reunión de ministras y ministros de Medio Ambiente, cuando decía que en las medidas a tomar deben ser medidas necesariamente económicas basadas en la equidad, porque era a partir de ahí que iban a poder ser enfrentadas necesariamente los desafíos climáticos. Dicho de otra manera, las estrategias para enfrentar el cambio climático no van a ser realmente completas y certeras si al mismo tiempo no se introducen esos elementos de equidad en las políticas económicas. Por otro lado, hay frenos para la inversión. Es decir, no tenemos los suficientes recursos para el financiamiento de todas estas necesidades, para el financiamiento climático, y para al mismo tiempo atender las necesidades sociales. Y cuando hablamos del financiamiento externo, también hay techos de endeudamiento. Es decir, esos techos de endeudamiento hacen que tenemos que optar. Es decir, no podemos invertir en todo lo que queremos. Y ahí es donde es sumamente importante tener en cuenta el análisis de riesgo, dentro de los cuales intervienen los riesgos climáticos en cuanto a las decisiones a tomar en cuanto a la inversión. Dicho sea de otra manera, si nosotros trabajamos trabajamos en la transparencia climática y trabajamos para determinar el nivel de riesgos, también vamos a estar laborando en el sentido de determinar cuáles son las inversiones a realizar, porque sabremos dónde están los mayores y los menores riesgos. Por otro lado, todo esto se presenta en un momento particularmente difícil, porque en el actual marco mundial tenemos, lo sabemos, una gran crisis de salud, una crisis inflacionaria derivada por las cadenas de suministros en los mercados internacionales, la crisis de Ucrania, que también ha provocado a su vez toda una serie de consecuencias en cadena, sanciones, efectos de las sanciones, y esas dificultades, por más importantes, por más graves que sean, no pueden hacer que los países dejen de trabajar en pos de enfrentar la gravísima crisis climática. Es decir, y esto lo digo a pesar de lo grave de la crisis. De manera que al mismo tiempo que el mundo está enfrentando una crisis tan grave como la actual, debemos trabajar al mismo tiempo por enfrentar la crisis climática, tanto desde la perspectiva de la mitigación como desde la perspectiva de la adaptación para aumentar nuestra resiliencia. Es decir, en un país, y nosotros lo vemos todos los días, en un país, y lo pongo como ejemplo porque están pasando situaciones similares en todo el resto del mundo, en un país como el nuestro, en el que las costas desaparecen, siendo el turismo la columna vertebral de nuestra economía. Una agricultura que está siendo afectada por lluvias estacionales y ciclos climáticos cada vez más accidentados, y además como los efectos que se están produciendo en la misma fauna y en los vectores epidemiológicos, como el dengue y aquellos correspondientes al dengue y la malaria, como efecto de la misma crisis climática. De manera que invertir en sostenibilidad, todavía se puede decir que en República Dominicana, en la situación actual, es posible invertir con las tecnologías actuales para mejorar la sostenibilidad. Todavía con las tecnologías actuales podemos mejorar. Y esto, un ejemplo característico, quizás el ejemplo mejor en este momento, sea el caso del paso a las energías renovables. Es decir, hace 2 años la tonelada de carbón valía $70, hoy día la tonelada de carbón vale $400. Es decir, hoy entonces, en ese caso específico, las tecnologías renovables, es decir, resultan rentables, mucho más rentables para los fines de la transformación. En fin, estas reflexiones me parece que son importantes porque reflejan, yo creo que la situación refleja el carácter contradictorio de la situación y el dilema que tenemos cada día en cuanto a las opciones de inversión. Nosotros tenemos por consiguiente opciones que tomar. Tenemos un ejemplo de ello es el que acabo de mencionar en cuanto a las energías renovables. La República Dominicana como isla, al fin, como el caso de todas las islas, tenemos recursos hídricos limitados, y sin embargo, y por consiguiente, no estamos en capacidad de producir un tránsito rápido a las energías renovables. En ese sentido, pues, nosotros cada día vamos a tener que tomar decisiones que nos permitan ir superando la situación de manera progresiva. Todo eso significa que la República Dominicana necesita apoyo, como todos los países que están en la misma situación que nosotros. Necesitamos apoyo no para la inacción, necesitamos apoyo para tomar medidas valientes, para tomar medidas difíciles. En ese sentido, cuando República Dominicana sostiene, levanta las banderas de la justicia climática, no está pidiendo dádivas, es decir, no está pidiendo una dádiva, una limosna. Lo que está pidiendo es oportunidades, la posibilidad de desarrollar negocios que sean justos y que sean rentables al mismo tiempo. De manera que estamos en una situación complicada, estamos en una situación difícil, y esta Semana Regional del Clima Latinoamérica y Caribe es una oportunidad para intercambiar experiencias, para conocer lo que se está haciendo en los otros países e ir estableciendo líneas comunes, sobre todo tal como se expresó en la reunión que acaba de terminar, en la reunión de ministras y ministros iberoamericanos de medio ambiente. Pues ahí se habló de la necesidad de que todos estos países definamos líneas comunes de cara a Sharm el Sheikh, de cara a la COP27. Yo pienso que el mismo propósito debe animar la Semana del Clima Latinoamérica y Caribe. Ese intercambio de experiencias que nos lleve a establecer esas líneas comunes. Y no se trata simplemente de andar rápido, de hacer las cosas. Es verdad que estamos muy presionados, pero el asunto no es ir rápido, sino ir en la dirección correcta. En ese sentido, quisiera terminar citando unas palabras de Mahatma Gandhi, donde Mahatma Gandhi decía que la velocidad es irrelevante si vas en la dirección incorrecta. O sea que definamos con claridad el camino en el que nosotros queremos recorrer, y una vez que lo definamos, es decir, aprovechemos este reto para crecer juntos en la dirección correcta. Apostemos por un mismo objetivo, y yo estoy seguro de que si lo hacemos, vamos a lograr una humanidad que viva en un mundo más seguro y también una humanidad más próspera. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchas gracias, doctor Max Puig. Y de esta manera hemos llegado al final del acto de apertura de la Semana del Clima de América Latina y el Caribe, un evento que se erige con el propósito de así poder inspirar a las personas, a las empresas y a los gobiernos para impulsar los compromisos globales de cara a la lucha contra el cambio climático. Informamos a los distinguidos jefes de delegaciones presentes en este acto que la mesa ministerial se estará desarrollando en el Garden Tent para dar continuidad a las jornadas de discusión. En nombre del Ministerio de Medio Ambiente de República Dominicana y del Consejo Nacional del Cambio Climático, agradecemos profundamente que hayan estado con nosotros en esta actividad. Muchas gracias y buenas tardes.
Hello everyone and welcome to the High Level Climate Champions event, Racing to a Better World. Welcome, and I will now pass over to the COP26 presidency.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Global Climate Action High-Level event. It's an absolute pleasure to host this event alongside our dear friend, the UN Secretary General. And I want to begin by thanking the high-level champions and the Marrakesh Partnership. Nigel and Gonzalo have thrown themselves into this role with energy and commitment. Over 5,000 businesses from across the globe have now joined the Race to Zero campaign, including 60% of the UK's biggest listed companies, as indeed have over 1,000 cities, 60 regions, and 1,000 educational institutions. This is an extraordinary achievement. The Race to Resilience now represents 2,500 organizations, and together, their commitment will protect 2.3 billion people by 2030, and they aim to increase that to 4 billion. And last week, here at COP26, we announced that the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero now represents $130 trillion in assets. More broadly, what we've also seen here in Glasgow is a strengthening of the relationship between governments and non-state actors. And this is absolutely vital. As I've always said, climate action requires us all, local and national governments, civil society, businesses, financial institutions, all working together. And the Marrakesh partners help to drive such collaboration. Over the past 2 weeks, here in Glasgow, governments and non-state actors have joined forces in pursuit of common cause. Take deforestation. Here at COP, the UK presidency brought together 130 countries representing 90% of the world's forests to commit to halt and reverse forest loss by 2030. And it was backed by a pledge of over $19 billion in public and private funding. And CEOs from 30 financial institutions committed here in Glasgow to eliminate investments linked to deforestation. Let's look at coal. Last week, I launched the Global Coal to Clean Power Transition Statement, in which 23 countries committed to end coal for the first time. And new corporate members have joined the Powering Past Coal Alliance, including NatWest, Lloyds Bank, HSBC, and Export Development Canada. At the World Leaders Summit, we launched the Glasgow Breakthroughs. And these are commitments from governments, joining forces, working with business and society to make clean technologies accessible and affordable around the world. And the collaboration is growing even stronger. The move to a green, resilient global economy is increasing at pace. Our high-level champions have played an important, I would say, vital role in building that momentum. So we look forward to listening to their shared vision for improving the partnership and to hearing others' reflections on their roles. And I hope that other parties today will join us in recognizing their work and supporting their great efforts. Thank you very much, and I'm now going to hand over to the Secretary General, who is, of course, our co-host. Thank you.
Colleagues, friends, this event, perhaps like no other at COP26, underscores a core truth. The climate action struggle requires all hands on deck. It is everyone's responsibility, and you are showing the way. I am inspired by the mobilization of civil society, by the moral voice of young people keeping our feet to the fire, by the dynamism and example of indigenous communities, by the tireless engagement of women's groups, by the action of more and more cities around the world, by a growing consciousness as the private sector aligns balance sheets and investment decisions around net zero. I thank the high-level climate action champions, Gonzalo Munoz and Nigel Topping, and so many others for your efforts. You are indeed racing to a better world, and governments need to pick up the pace and show the necessary ambition on mitigation, adaptation, and finance in a balanced way. We cannot settle for the lowest common denominator. We know what must be done. Keeping the 1.5 goal within reach means reducing emissions globally by 45% by 2030. But the present set of nationally determined contributions, even if fully implemented, would still increase emissions by 2030. According to the latest joint analysis of the nationally determined contributions by UNEP and UNFCCC, we remain on a catastrophic temperature rise track well above 2 degrees Celsius. So net zero pledges require rapid, sustained emissions cuts this decade. And I welcome the recognition of this fact in yesterday's US-China cooperation agreement that I consider an important step in the right direction. But promises ring hollow when the fossil fuels industry still receives trillions in subsidies as measured by the IMF, or when countries are still building coal plants, or when carbon is still without a price, distorting markets and investor decisions. Every country, every city, every company, every financial institution must radically, credibly, and verifiably reduce their emissions and decarbonize their portfolios starting now. Dear friends, while it's far from enough, far from enough, we can take stock of progress. Last week, a number of countries committed to working collectively to halt and reverse forest loss and land degradation by 2030. Year two, we need meaningful concrete action and results in the 2020s. More than 1,000 cities around the world have committed to reach net zero by 2050 or earlier, sometimes far earlier. Our host city, Glasgow, has set a 2030 deadline. The Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, the gold standard for credible commitments and transparent targets, is managing $10 trillion in assets and catalyzing change across industries. I encourage the much larger Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero to follow the same path. The global coal pipeline has decreased by 76% since 2015. The G20, including the 3 largest public financiers, have committed to ending overseas coal finance. 28 new members joined the Powering Past Coal Alliance, raising the membership to 165 countries, cities, regions, and businesses. And 44 countries and 32 companies and regions have committed at COP26 to transition from coal to clean power. And this will be an enormous task. That is why I've been calling for the formation of coalitions of countries, international financial institutions, and private finance, as well as renewable energy companies, to support this momentous shift and to organize coalitions in support of specific countries that need to speed their energy transition. Some 30 member states and regional development banks have pledged immediate support for the clean energy transition in countries. And I urge more financial institutions and investors to follow suit. I welcome the partnership that will allow South Africa to rapidly decommission its coal plants while ensuring that workers and communities are not left behind. Indonesia and Vietnam have pledged to phase out coal by 2040. They will need support. And we need similar coalitions to deliver resilient infrastructure and adaptation in countries on the front lines of the climate crisis, from small island developing states to the least developed countries. Friends and colleagues, the announcements here in Glasgow are encouraging, but they are far from enough. The emissions gap remains a devastating threat. The finance and adaptation gap represent a glaring injustice for the developing world. We need even more ambition in future revised nationally determined contributions. And we need pledges to be implemented. We need commitments to turn concrete. We need actions to be verified. And we need to bridge the deep and real credibility gap. As an engineer, I know that durable structures need solid foundations. We must be able to measure progress and to adjust when off track. We have a critical mass of global commitments to net zero from both governments and non-state actors. We must now zoom in on the quality and the implementation of plans, on measuring and analyzing, on reporting, transparency and accountability. And that is why, beyond the mechanisms already set out in the Paris Agreement, I've decided to establish a high-level expert group to propose clear standards to measure and analyze net zero commitments from non-state actors. The high-level expert group will build on existing work and submit a series of recommendations to me during the course of next year. And they will work in a transparent and inclusive manner, and I invite you all to cooperate fully in their establishment and then with them. We need action if commitments are to pass the credibility test. We need to hold each other accountable, governments, non-state actors, and the civil society. Because only together can we keep 1.5 degrees within reach and the equitable and resilient world we need. And I thank you for your commitment and for your dedication to this that is the most important fight of our lives.
Thank you, Excellency. I now pass the floor to Mrs. Patricia Espinosa, the UNFCCC Executive Secretary.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, dear Co-President Alok Sharma. Thank you, Secretary General Guterres. It's really an enormous pleasure for me to be able to sit here in front of all of you with the climate champions, Nigel Topping and Gonzalo Munoz. Thank you. I have really testified how much they have been working over these last 2 years. And it's really incredibly encouraging to see all of you here. I think this is the best attended event on global climate action that we have had since it began after Paris. The same is true of the multiple events that have been taking place in the climate action zone. Dear friends, in the remaining days of COP26, the eyes of the world are focused on Glasgow, watching to see not only if parties make the bold and courageous decisions needed to fully unleash the potential of the Paris Agreement, but whether global leaders across all sectors make the commitments necessary to prove that our transition to a low emissions future is truly underway. The transition required is beyond the scope, scale, and speed of anything humanity has accomplished in the past. It's a daunting but achievable task. Glasgow can be the starting point of a new, more prosperous era, a greener, more resilient and sustainable future, one that is more just and more prosperous for all people. The transition, however, cannot be driven by governments alone. Inclusive multilateralism brings together party and non-party stakeholders, including cities, subnational regions, businesses, investors, and civil society. And I thank all of you who traveled to be here in Glasgow for your efforts and for having come here. And all of you are driven by a unity of purpose, which is reflected in the achievements of the Marrakesh Partnership and the global campaigns of Race to Resilience, Race to Zero, and the Global Financial Alliance for Net Zero. Yet, They must continue to evolve. That's why I welcome the champion's vision for improvement of the Marrakesh Partnership for the next 5 years. One, showing the clear path ahead to significantly reducing global emissions and scaling up finance. It is vital that the issue of solidarity is included in this discussion. We cannot repeat the mistakes of history, when great transition and change have resulted in people and entire nations falling by the wayside. We know that government and business leaders must work together with non-party stakeholders, including unions, to help provide the policies and programs that will facilitate solidarity with vulnerable communities whose reality keeps getting worse and worse. I do want to end by thanking our climate champions, Gonzalo and Nigel, for their tireless effort and dedication throughout not only this COP, but 2 very, very challenging years. Dear friends, our efforts to address our climate emergency do not end in Glasgow. Where one chapter ends, a new one begins. We will work harder than ever because we must. We have no other choice. I look forward to continue working with all of you to drive the transition to a better, greener, healthier, and more resilient world. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Secretary. I would now like to invite the event moderator, Mrs. Selina Abraham, who will lead us into the second session of the event, moving to the non-party side. Mrs. Abraham, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, COP President, Secretary General, and Executive Secretary for these opening remarks. And allow me to invite you to take your seats on the floor. Welcome, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Global Climate Action Event, Racing to a Better World. Racing to the future that we want, to the future that we deserve, but one that we have not achieved yet. My name is Selina Abraha. I'm the Africa Regional Manager for the Global Landscapes Forum, one of the many NGOs, observers who are here at COP. And while we may have the title of observers, we know that non-state actors are doing so much more than just observing. We're taking action, building alliances, and driving the ambition that is required. So to everyone around the world who doesn't have a seat at the negotiation table, this event is for you. In the next 2 hours, we are going to look at the momentum and the action that's being driven by all facets of society, from young activists to city mayors, so that we can harness this power to move quicker towards our climate goals. But before we dive into this rich discussions ahead and the program that we have for you, I would like us all to take a deep breath. It's been a very long few weeks. I know there's been a lot of work that's been put in, and this is our moment to really take some self-reflection. Thank you, everyone. This is our opportunity to reflect on the progress that we've made to date, to ask ourselves how far have we come and whether we have gone far enough. And to have this conversation, I'm really excited to join the climate champions. Nigel, Gonzalo, allow me to do a quick recap of your work, which has happened over 2 years. You've launched the improved plan for the Marrakesh Partnership. You've also launched the Yearbook for Climate Action. And in this yearbook, I'm gonna switch to this mic, yeah. In this yearbook, you include clear plans for the future of your flagship campaigns, the Race to Resilience, the Race to Zero, and the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. You made it clear that your intentions are to drive meaningful action at the urgency that's required, given the glaring and terrifying realities that we're facing across mitigation, adaptation, resilience, and the state of finance. You've placed an emphasis on clear accountability and tracking, and to strengthening the capacity of local actors to drive solutions that work for them. So it seems that the race is on. But Gonzalo, can I turn to you first? Since Madrid, we've seen a lot of commitments from cities, from businesses, regions, investors. This COP has made it clear that we must pivot from talk to implementation. So what are your reflections about your nearly 3 years now as UN climate change high-level champion, and how far the non-state climate action agenda has progressed?
Well, first, thank you to the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, to the COP26 President Alok Sharma, and of course to the UNFCCC Executive Secretary Patricia Espinosa for such powerful remarks. And good afternoon, everyone, and thanks so much, Salina, for bringing that perspective, because I think that there's a lot of extra value when we see all of this as a film and not just the single picture of today. What I would like to do now with all of you is to really watch the film of those 3 years that you've been mentioning, because for me, it all started right after Katowice, where we know that there were still some questions about the importance and the relevance of following science. We knew that. And many of us were sharing the same level of frustrations. So the Secretary General in that same year, 2019, called all of us to get aligned under one concrete goal, to keep the 1.5 alive. And that, with the leadership of the UNDP and the UNFCCC and Chile, that's why we launched the Climate Ambition Alliance that particular moment that was somehow the birth of the Race to Zero, putting together, in that case, commitments coming from states and also from non-state actors from all around the world, all of them committed to a net zero 2050 world. And that was one of the key initiatives of the Secretary General 2019 Climate Summit. Let's be honest then around what we really were thinking about the expectations at that moment, only a little bit more than 2 years ago. At that time, there were just a bunch of probably 10 companies globally committed to this trajectory, and we were trying at that time to bring another 10. During the summit, we were really proud with working with the UN Global Compact and their initiative, the Business Ambition for 1.5 initiative, of having achieved 97 companies joining this trajectory. So take a look. We've moved from an expectation of another 10 to having reached 97 to having now more than 5,000 companies from all around the world, all sizes, all regions, all sectors of the economy, all of them committed to a net zero 2050, but at the very latest. All of them setting, thank you, thanks to you. And thank you, Secretary General, for that inspiration. All of them know that it's all about how rigorous their decarbonization targets will be. They are setting rigorous decarbonizations aligned with science-based targets. We went from some 100 cities at your summit, Secretary General, to more than 1,000 cities, as the Secretary General mentioned in his remarks, thanks to the work of ICLEI, C40, and GCOM. The commitments frame coming from the subnational regions, the states and regions at a local level, were done at that time, and still some of them under the Under 2 coalition. Under 2 meaning under 2 degrees. This week, That coalition has changed the name to be a net zero coalition. That is massive. That coalition represents more than 50% of the global economy. And of course, we have seen now also the financial institution, the financial sector globally, finally getting aligned and putting climate in the center of their agenda, as well as we're seeing nature finally taking the level of relevance that should have always had. We know that the agenda has broadened during these 3 years, bringing in stakeholders from diverse regions across the world and deepening regional engagement with our shared ambitious climate agenda, from 10 states of Brazil to Maharashtra, from large multinational to local shops, from managers, financial managers to hospitals. So while definitely net zero in less than 3 years has gone from extreme to mainstream, we know long-term goals are not enough. And we know that mitigation is not enough. That's why we launched the Race to Resilience, to work on building the resilience for 4 billion people in these decades towards 2030. And we've also positioned the Race to Zero with a concrete focus on halving the emissions by 2030 as the most important of the acts that we need to deliver when it comes to the private sector. So it was science that brought us here. And we can say very proudly that now science or ambition is a synonymous of science when it comes to climate. What we need to do now is make ambition also synonymous of integrity and solidarity. Climate action needs to be spread all around the world. We need to regionalize this agenda.